The train rolled into Copper Springs under a hard Arizona sun, the kind that pressed down on a person until they felt smaller than they were. But the heat was not what made Eliza hesitate on the platform. It was the moment her feet touched the dusty boards and her future, one she had traveled hundreds of miles to claim, looked straight at her and turned away. She saw him at once. Harlan Cobb. Handlebar mustache, brown vest, the same man she had exchanged letters with for 7 months. The man who said he wanted a wife who could cook, mend, work hard, and didn't care much for beauty or polish. The man who promised she'd have a home. For a moment, hope fluttered in her chest. Eliza gave a small wave and stepped forward, but her weight shifted to her left leg, the one that had never healed right after she fell from a loft at 8 years old, and the familiar, uneven rhythm showed in her gait. Cobb's expression changed. His mouth tightened, his eyes narrowed, his gaze dropped to her feet like he was inspecting a broken fence post. Then, without a word, he shook his head, climbed onto his buckboard, snapped the reins, and drove away. Just like that. Eliza stood in the dust, her hands still raised in a half-wave that now felt foolish. The platform emptied around her. The sun bore down on her best dress, a faded blue calico she had mended at the elbow. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that crying did nothing. The station master approached, concern etched in the lines of his weathered face. "Ma'am, that Cobb's wagon?" It was. "And you're the lady he sent for?" "I was." He shifted awkwardly, eyes flicking to her leg before quickly looking away. He didn't need an explanation, he already understood. "That ain't right," he muttered. "Man ought to at least say something." "It's done," Eliza said. Her voice stayed flat, steady, steadier than she felt. She had $2.37 left in her purse, enough for 4 nights at a boarding house. 4 nights to decide what to do with a life that had just collapsed at her feet. But life, as Eliza Whitfield knew too well, never paused to let a person gather themselves. At dawn the next morning, she walked 2 miles through the rising heat toward a ranch that needed help, a place the station master said belonged to a young man who had been poorly since the dust storm, hard country for a woman alone. But Eliza had run out of easy roads long ago. The Holloway Ranch looked like it was losing a battle with the land, sagging porch, crooked shutters, weeds taller than her knees choking the garden. A bay mare stood thin-ribbed in the corral, no smoke from the chimney. Eliza knocked. The door creaked open on its own. The smell hit her, sour, heavy, the smell of fever and rot. A man lay on a cot, barely breathing, his skin gray, his shirt soaked with sweat, his arm wrapped in filthy rags that stank of infection. The red streaks crawling up his arm told her everything. Blood poisoning. Her grandmother had warned her about it. Once it reached the heart, it was over. 2 miles back to town would take too long. So Eliza rolled up her sleeves. She scrubbed the wound with hot water and soap, holding him down when he thrashed and screamed. She tore strips from her own petticoat to make clean bandages. She boiled willow bark into bitter tea and forced it into him drop by drop. Hours blurred into night. Night blurred into dawn. She worked until her fingers shook, and her leg ached so badly she nearly collapsed. But the man, this stranger, kept breathing, shallow but steady. His fever raged for 2 days straight, sweat pouring from him as she cooled his forehead and whispered steady words to keep him anchored in the world. On the 3rd morning, his skin cooled. The fever broke. Eliza sagged in the chair beside him, too tired to celebrate. Then a voice, rough and confused. Who are you?" She opened her eyes to find him awake, staring at her like she was something he wasn't sure belonged in the room. "Name's Eliza," she said. "I was meant to marry a man in town, but he didn't want me, so I came here instead. You weren't dead yet, so I figured that was something worth working on." He blinked at her, dazed. "You Cobb's woman?" "Supposed to be." And he left you because of your leg. And that's about the size of it." The man stared at her for a long moment. "Cobb's a fool," he said quietly. "So I've gathered." He tried to sit up and gasped, grabbing his bandaged arm. She pushed him back gently. "You're through the worst," she said, "but that arm will need tending a while." "What's your name?" she asked. He hesitated, then answered, "Gideon Holloway." His eyes dropped to the white cotton wrapped around his arm. "Is that a petticoat?" "Was," she said. "You needed it more." For the first time, the faintest smile touched his tired face. And in that broken, quiet house, where death had nearly settled in, something new stirred. Not hope, not yet, but the start of something that might become hope. Something that neither of them recognized. Not yet. Gideon healed slowly, but the ranch healed faster. Eliza scrubbed floors that had gone gray with months of dust. She washed the windows until sunlight poured through them in warm squares. She brought the vegetable garden back from the edge of ruin, pulling weeds until her hands turned black with soil. She cooked simple meals: beans, cornbread, soup made from vegetables she coaxed out of the dirt. And Gideon watched. Not in the way people in town watched her, judging every uneven step. He watched quietly, like he was trying to understand something he had forgotten long ago. By the 7th day he could sit up on his own. By the 10th he managed slow steps around the house. His arm was still weak, but the angry red streaks were gone. Eliza never asked about the life he had before she arrived. She learned things in pieces. From the sampler stitched by a woman named Margaret. From the jars of peaches stored in the root cellar. From the sadness that lived behind Gideon's eyes. One evening they sat on the porch together, Gideon in a chair, Eliza on the top step, her bad leg stretched out. "She was my sister," he said suddenly. Eliza didn't turn. She knew pushing would make him retreat. "Fever took her 2 years back," he said. "She was all I had left." Quote, "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Everyone dies. She just did it sooner than most." His tone was flat, practiced. But the way his jaw tightened told another story. Eliza looked out at the darkening hills. A coyote called in the distance. "You've been alone since then?" she asked. "Yes." The porch fell quiet again, but a quiet with something living in it. Not grief, not quite. Recognition. Two people who knew what it was like to lose too much too early. Work found its rhythm. Gideon repaired fences. Eliza mended clothes. They shared meals at the small kitchen table. Shared silence. Shared the long, slow stretch of days that weren't quite lonely anymore. Then came the afternoon Sadi, the bay mare, escaped through a broken section of fence. Gideon cursed under his breath. "I fixed this last week." Eliza lifted her skirts. "Then we better go get her." They chased the horse through scrub and dust, Gideon circling one side, Eliza limping determinedly around the other. Twice they almost caught her. Twice she dodged away. The third time Eliza shouted and waved her arms, forcing the mare toward Gideon. He grabbed the halter. "Got you," he said, breathless. Eliza bent over, laughing breathlessly, hair falling loose from its pins. He stared at her. She didn't notice. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. A real laugh. Something rusty inside him shifted. They walked back together with the horse between them. It was the easiest silence they had shared yet. That evening, Gideon brought out a harmonica. He played a tune, uncertain at first, then steadier. Eliza hummed along without thinking. When the last note faded, neither spoke. Some things didn't need words. 2 days later, she rode into town for supplies. It was a mistake. Mrs. Cobb stood inside the mercantile, lips thin as a knife blade. Her gaze swept over Eliza like she was something that should have stayed behind a barn, not walked into a store. "Some women have no shame," she said loudly. "Living out there with a man who ain't her husband, limping around like that. Lord knows what she had to do to make him take her in." Eliza didn't look at her. She didn't look at anyone, She simply gathered her things, walked outside, and tightened the saddlebags with shaking hands. By the time she returned to the ranch, the hurt had baked into something hard and quiet. Gideon saw it the moment she dismounted. What happened in town? Nothing. He didn't push. Not that day. But he heard her crying that night through the thin wall. Soft, painful sounds she tried to smother with a pillow, the kind that cracked something open inside him. 2 mornings later, Gideon saddled his horse. I'm going into town. No, Eliza said sharply. Please don't. I need seed. Let me go. I said no. The word came out too hard. She flinched. He rode away before she could see the guilt on his face. Inside the feed store, Harlan Cobb was waiting. Well, well, Cobb said. Living with that crippled woman, are you? Making a fool of yourself. Gideon's hands curled into fists. You ordered her, he said quietly. Promised her a home. Then walked away because you didn't like how she stepped off a train. You judge her for her leg. But that limp makes her more of a woman than you'll ever deserve. The room fell silent. But Cobb had one more knife to twist. When folks refuse to sell to you, when the bank shuts its doors, you'll remember she's the reason. Gideon didn't punch him, but he wanted to. When Gideon returned home, Eliza was packing her trunk. What are you doing? He asked. I'm leaving. No. I've already cost you enough, she whispered. Your credit, your standing, your future. I won't ruin you. Eliza. Don't, she choked. Don't make this harder. He crossed the room in 2 long steps and caught her hands. You saved my life, he said. You think I'm letting you walk away now? She looked at him, eyes raw and tired. Then, slowly, very slowly, she began to unpack her things. She was staying. But she hadn't said yes to anything. Not yet. Sunday came with a hard blue sky stretching over Copper Springs, and Gideon told Eliza something she never expected to hear. We're going to the church social. Her stomach tightened. No, Gideon. Not after what happened in town. If we hide, they win. Let them win, she whispered. I don't care anymore. He looked at her then, really looked. I do. Those 2 words settled deep inside her, heavier than fear. So she washed her face. She braided her hair. She put on her faded blue dress, the same one she had worn when she stepped off the train and her life fell apart, and they rode into town together. The church hall froze the moment they stepped through the door. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Women whispered behind fans. Men stared at the floor. Eliza felt their eyes crawling over her limp, her dress, the way her hand trembled where it rested on Gideon's arm. Her throat tightened. She wanted to run. Gideon's arm tensed around her hand. We walk forward, he said softly. So they did. They reached the refreshment table, no one stepping near. The room buzzed with quiet judgment. Then, Harlan Cobb shoved through the crowd. Well, Cobb sneered, look who dragged himself here, and he brought his little... Careful, Gideon said, low and sharp. Next word out of your mouth better be, ma'am, quote. Cobb faltered. A ripple passed through the hall. You got nerve, Cobb spat. Living with that crippled woman, acting like she's worth something. Gideon set down his lemonade, turned fully to face him. She kept me alive, he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. When fever near killed me, she sat up 3 nights straight, cleaned my wound, prayed over me, fed me with her own hands. She planted my garden, fixed my house, brought the ranch back from the dead. No one moved. And you call her shameful? A woman who walked 2 miles on a bad leg in the heat to help a stranger? Who never complained? Whose work saved my life? Whispers spread through the crowd. She's stronger than any man here, Gideon said. And the only shame I see is a man who left her standing on a train platform because she didn't walk the way he thought she should. Cobb's jaw twitched. His mother turned pale. People stared. And for once, not at Eliza. At him. Cobb spun on his heel and stormed out of the hall. His mother followed. Silence held for one long breath. Then Mr. Tatum, the blacksmith, stepped forward, removing his hat. "Ma'am," he said to Eliza, "I knew Gideon's daddy. He'd be mighty proud today." The schoolteacher came next. Then the pastor's wife. Then a young mother. A farmer. A ranch hand. Not everyone. But enough. A circle formed around Eliza and Gideon. Small, but real. The fiddle started up again. Soft. Hopeful. Eliza blinked fast, trying not to let her tears fall. She didn't know where to look until Gideon touched her elbow gently. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. He lifted his eyes to hers. "Because it was true. Because somebody needed to say it. And because—" He stopped, breath catching. "Because you deserve to hear it." The ride home was quiet. When they reached the ridge overlooking the ranch, the sun was melting into the horizon, painting the land in red and gold. The house, the corral, the patched fences, all glowed in the fading light. Eliza folded her hands tightly in her lap. "What you said back there," she murmured, "about me, about what I did, you made it sound like I was somebody." "You are," Gideon said. She couldn't speak. The words sat in her throat, heavy and trembling. Gideon set the reins aside. His voice dropped. "I need to tell you something." She waited. "After Margaret died, I stopped caring. About the ranch, about living. When the dust storm came, I saw it coming, and I just stood there." Her breath hitched. "You wanted to die." "Yes." The silence stretched. "And now?" she asked quietly. Gideon looked at her, really looked, his eyes soft in the dying light. "Now I want to see what tomorrow looks like." Her heart twisted. "I found Margaret's letters," she said, "in the cellar. I know she meant a lot to you." He nodded once, jaw tight. "And I know I'm not her." Gideon turned fully to her. "Eliza, I don't want you instead of someone else. I want you because of who you are." She held her breath. "I want you," he said slowly, "because the house doesn't feel empty anymore. Because you brought life back into a place I thought was dead. Because when I wake up, I think about hearing your voice. Because you're the strongest woman I've ever met." He swallowed hard. "And because your cornbread tastes like home." A laugh escaped her, soft, shaky. He reached for her hands. "I can't promise you comfort," he said. "Can't promise the crops will grow, but I can promise you I'll stand beside you, and you'll never face a day alone again. Not as long as I'm breathing." Her eyes stung. Her voice trembled. "Yes," she whispered. Gideon froze. "Yes, yes," she said, stronger now. "I'll stay. I'll marry you. I want this. I want you." He closed his eyes like the words were a prayer answered. When he opened them again, they were bright with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He touched his forehead to hers. "Take me home," she whispered. The wagon rolled down the ridge. The stars opened above them. The lamp glowed warm in the window, their window now. And for the first time in her life, Eliza rode toward a future that didn't turn away from her. A future that waited with arms open. A home. A partner. A love she never expected.